A lot of you mentioned that you'd like to hear updates on stories that promise updates. And until now, I haven't made a dedicated video with an update to a previous story, as most people who submit their stories never do send updates. However, an anonymous viewer who submitted a beach story back in July of 2024 recently shared an update to their story. So I'll play the original story first if you want to refresh or maybe haven't heard it yet, or you can skip to the timestamp on the screen to get right to the update story. Beaches have always terrified me. Well, not always. My fear is a direct result of what I'm about to tell you. As a kid, I used to love the shore. I remember spending many summers in eager anticipation of the weekend when my family and I would hang out at our beach house. Or, if I was lucky, they'd let me spend it at my friend Charles' beach house, which was even more fun. I was 16, and this was one of those special summer weekends. Me, Charles, and our third friend Riley were going to spend a few unsupervised days at Charles' beach house in LBI. Riley was a year older than Charles and I, and had recently gotten his license, so we'd be driving down in his car. The drive down was fantastic. Riley was a pretty uncoordinated driver at the time, so most of the ride was spent laughing at him swerving and cursing the road. It was great. We got down to LBI in good time and immediately moved all of our stuff from the car to the rooms we'd be staying in. The layout of the house is important to the story, so I'll briefly mention it. There's a front door, a garage door which connects the back to the front yard, a back sliding door, and a back upstairs deck that connects the upstairs bedrooms. There's also a spiral staircase that allows you to go directly from the back deck to the ground, so you can enter and exit the house from upstairs. The house sits along a lagoon, meaning the back end of the house faces a narrow channel of water, with houses on the opposite side. We were at that ripe age where chasing girls was a priority, and a nice beach house all to ourselves was the perfect occasion. We spent a few hours figuring out which girls were down the shore at the time and talked to them on Snapchat. Finally, we found a group of 3 cute girls that said they'd be down to come kick back at Charles' house. I had more than enough weed to last us the weekend, and we had snagged a few bottles of our parents' alcohol before leaving. It was perfect. Things were going very well. The 3 girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun and flirty, and the 3 of us could tell where the night would probably end up. At one point, the 6 of us decided to smoke in Charles' backyard pool. It was small, but it was perfect for 6 drunk kids. I remember the sight vividly. The gentle bay breeze blowing through my hair, the steam from the heated water rising slowly with the puffs of smoke from the joint. At our age, this was bliss. But then suddenly, Charles turned the music all the way down and stared over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned around, peering into the darkness. I could roughly make out the houses on the other side of the lagoon, but I wasn't quite sure what Charles was looking at. One of the girls asked Charles why he turned the music down, and he whispered that he saw someone standing on the dock opposite the house. I figured he was messing with us, so I started laughing. "Who cares, bro? People literally live here," I said. Charles shook his head. "I know that family personally. My parents said they're in Florida for the week." In all honesty, I still thought it wasn't a big deal or he was just messing around, so I kept chuckling. The girls were a little freaked out, though, and said they wanted to go back inside. I wasn't going to argue, so the 6 of us started making our way out of the pool. As we were drying off in the yard, Riley jumped and cursed, looking towards the lagoon. The rest of us turned, and even though the light was dim, I could definitely see what looked like movement coming from the opposite dock. The 6 of us froze in place, trying to get a better glimpse of what we were looking at. Just then, a passing car on the road across from us lit up the scene ever so slightly, and the sight was horrifying. There were 4 tall silhouettes standing at the edge of the dock, facing us. It was impossible to tell what they were wearing or what they looked like, but there was no doubt they were facing our direction. "Go inside now," said Charles with a shaky voice, motioning us toward the sliding door. As we rushed inside, I heard a distinct sound that remains the most terrifying noise I'd ever heard. 4 consecutive splashes rang out from behind us. Those guys were swimming across the lagoon. We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The girls screamed while Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. Charles quickly ran to the front to lock that door too, and the 6 of us ran to the room that wasn't visible from the outside. We waited in silence, horrified at what we might hear next. A few minutes passed. Still nothing. Out of nowhere, Riley cursed, revealing to us that he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Charles started to panic, knowing that this house was about to be broken into. Just then, we heard soft, quieted footsteps above us, and that was the last straw. None of us had any weapons on hand, and we were all intoxicated, so running was really our only option. The 6 of us sprinted for the front door and bolted to the car, which Riley started up in a flash. The chaos of it all was too much for Riley to handle, and he destroyed Charles' mailbox on the way out of the driveway. Once we were far enough away, we called the police. The ordeal was a nightmare. We went back to the house once police had searched it, but the news was shattering. All of the valuables on the top floor were missing, but that wasn't the worst part. Charles' family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler boat which was also stolen, most likely as the getaway vehicle. Charles' father tended to keep a spare set of keys inside a small hatch below the steering wheel, which the police concluded was how the culprits got away so quickly. How they knew where the key was hidden is something I still wonder. The police were never able to arrest the perpetrators, and likely never will. Charles, Riley, and I think whoever robbed the house might have been someone who knew Charles' family, and they knew where the key was, and the house was supposed to be vacant that weekend as well. It's been a long time since this chilling event took place, but I haven't let one day pass without locking every door and window in my home. Do yourself a favor and lock your doors at night. Okay, so I never thought I'd be revisiting this again, but I actually do have an update that's relevant to the story I sent in a while back. This update isn't exactly my story per se, but I'm gonna do my best to tell it, so bear with me. Before I get into it though, here's a quick recap of my original submission. When I was 16, I spent a weekend at my friend Charles' beach house in LBI with our other friend Riley. We were chilling in his pool with some girls we had invited over when we noticed people standing across the lagoon watching us. The next thing we knew, we realized they had jumped into the water and were swimming across, so we quickly rushed inside. Unfortunately, we didn't thoroughly lock up the house and those people broke in. By the time it was all over, the house had been robbed completely, and to top it all off, the perps had fled the scene in Charles' family's boat, which they had also stolen. As far as I knew, the authorities were never able to locate the boat or catch the thieves, and that's where things ended. Admittedly, Charles and I fell out of touch after going to separate colleges and moving to different cities, so it's not like I was there to actively receive constant updates about the situation, but I recently caught up with Charles at a high school reunion we both coincidentally attended. Which brings me to the following update. I wasn't even planning on going to the reunion, but my girlfriend convinced me it might be fun to see how everyone turned out, so I figured what the hell. I was flying solo, which is never fun, but the moment I stepped into the venue, I was pleasantly surprised to see that Charles was already there, talking to Riley and a few other guys from our friend group. It was a kind of cool but surreal moment all at the same time, seeing people you haven't spoken to in years that looked exactly the same but completely different, you know? I walked over and joined the circle, and it was actually really nice catching up. As the night went on, people started breaking off into smaller groups. Charles pulled Riley and me to the side and asked if we wanted to grab a drink at some random bar after things wrapped up. Riley couldn't for whatever reason. I think he had an early flight the next morning or something, but I was definitely game. So we end up at this little dive bar, just reminiscing about old times over a few beers. I can't exactly remember how, but that night at his beach house floated into the conversation. As soon as it did, Charles slapped the table like he suddenly remembered something he hadn't been thinking about. I should mention that I actually wrote some of this down in my notes app so I could tell the story as accurately as possible, or at least as accurately as Charles told me, because what he said next was pretty wild. So he starts explaining that his little brother Kieran is 19 now, and apparently he and his friends are way bigger troublemakers than we were back in the day. About a year ago, Kieran and 2 of his friends, without asking permission, decided to take the family's new boat out. This was their replacement boat, by the way, the one they got after the insurance payout from the stolen one. They took it out for what was supposed to be a late afternoon trip, along with a bunch of beer that they were going to drink while out on the water, which is obviously incredibly stupid and dangerous, not to mention illegal since they're all underage. But it gets worse. Charles said they were feeling adventurous, so they decided to anchor near Carvel Island. I had to look this up later, but apparently it's technically part of the Forsyth Wildlife Refuge, and you're not supposed to be there at night. Their plan was to anchor the boat as closely as they could safely get to it, kill the beers, then swim to shore and hang out on the island to watch the stars or whatever. So they swim to shore and find a nice spot on the beach. They're just sitting there waiting for the sun to go down, talking and whatnot, when one of Kieran's friends notices another boat that they hadn't seen before, anchored further down the shore. Kieran takes a closer look at this other boat, and from what Charles told me, he became convinced it looked exactly like their family's old Boston whaler, the one that got stolen. Now keep in mind, the boat is pretty far away and it's getting dark out, so Charles had a hard time believing his brother could be sure about it. But according to Charles, Kieran wouldn't even entertain the possibility that this was some random boat. So Kieran convinces his friends to swim out with him to get a better look at the boat. And that's exactly what they do. They swim all the way out there, and by the time they reach it, Kieran is 100% convinced that it's his family's old boat. Here's where it gets frustrating though. Kieran wanted to take pictures of the boat to show his parents, but they obviously hadn't brought their phones with them when they swam over, and by the time they would have swam back to their boat to get them, it would have been too dark to see anything clearly. One of Kieran's friends suggested calling the police, but Kieran and his other friend were terrified of getting in trouble. They had been drinking, they took the boat out without permission, and they were pretty sure they weren't even supposed to be at that island in the first place. So calling the cops was basically the last thing Kieran wanted to do. Instead, they decided to just swim back to their boat, drive it over to the other boat for some pictures, then figure out what to do once they got home. They swam back to the shore to cut out some of the swim, and as they were walking down the beach, one of Kieran's friends turned around and noticed a man walking towards them. Charles said that Kieran was positive the man picked up speed as soon as they turned around, like he was pursuing them. According to Kieran, this person also appeared to be holding a shovel, which was the scariest part. The boys ran, and the guy started running after them. They ran as fast as they could back to their boat, and Kieran looked back one more time to see that the guy was now running in the opposite direction, presumably back to his boat, which was significantly closer. The boys reached the boat and started leaving, but here's the thing. When you're operating a boat after sunset in New Jersey, there's all these regulations about how fast you can go and what lights you need to have on, so it wasn't like they could just gun it out of there. They had to follow the speed limits, which I can imagine made the whole thing even more nerve-wracking. That also meant no detour to check out the other boat. Charles said that Kieran described the ride back as the most tense thing he's ever experienced, and I believe it. Just knowing someone could be following you in the dark without being able to speed away. Kieran said he wasn't sure whether they were followed or not, but he could have sworn he heard the faint sounds of a boat somewhere in the darkness behind them. Once they made it back home, Kieran's friends again pushed him to call the police, but he still refused, saying he was more scared of his parents finding out what they had done than he was of whatever they saw on that island. The guilt ate him alive though, and he came clean to his parents the next day. All except the drinking detail, which Charles only found out because Kieran told him later. Charles said his parents were more furious at Kieran than he remembers them ever being at him, which is saying a lot. Charles' dad banned Kieran from using the house for the rest of the summer, among many other things. His parents ended up reporting what Kieran saw to the authorities, but Charles said nothing ever came of it, just like with our original incident. The police were all but useless. At that point in Charles' story, I had to interrupt him with a few questions, like how could the boat still be in use around LBI all these years later without anyone recognizing it, and why someone would anchor it so close to shore if it was really stolen. I wonder if the police ever searched the island for whatever that guy with the shovel was doing. Charles admitted he didn't have solid answers to any of those questions. His best guess about the boat was that whoever stole it might have stripped it or repainted it enough to avoid suspicion. It's not like every boat owner in the area has the registration numbers memorized, As for why they'd anchor so close to shore, maybe they felt comfortable because it was a restricted area where most people wouldn't go. But my biggest questions were about the guy with the shovel. Charles just shrugged when I asked about that, though, saying maybe he was burying something or digging something up. Either way, it spooked Kieran and his friends enough that they ultimately confessed to something Kieran would normally never tell his parents about, and that was pretty much it. Charles and I talked for a little while longer, and then it came time to leave, so we said our goodbyes. I still have no idea what to make of most of this, and hearing the story definitely didn't give me any closure about it. If anything, all it did was open up a whole nother can of worms that will most likely be left unresolved.